Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. We're taking Black folks into the future. Most often when people talk about Afrofuturism, the first things that come to mind are Wakanda, you know, uh, Octavia Butler, fantasy, science fiction, and things of the like. But there's an academic side to this Afrofuturist movement and this Afrofuturist school of thought. And that brings me to my guest for today. Yule Anderson is a nationally and internationally known futurist. Yule started his interest in future after reading Megatrends and Limit to Growth. He continued his study of future while pursuing a master's at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and continued using his future skills while working in the cities of Boston, New York, Miami, Atlanta, and the states of Florida and Massachusetts. Internationally, Yule uses his future skills in Sierra Leone and Nairobi, Kenya. And with that, I'd like to welcome my guest, Yule Anderson. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, man.
Thank you for coming on. Before we get into the specifics of what you actually do, what is it that moved you into futuristic studies?
It's so interesting. When I was young, like most people, we need some mentors and some guidance as to what kind of careers we're going to pursue. And I knew I was going to graduate school, but it was my aunt, Donna Anderson, who told me that I should study future studies, and I never knew that was a discipline. And so when I went to the School of Ed at University of Massachusetts, they had a division in there on futures and research methodology, and I was able to study that as I got my master's.
And what exactly does that look like? People use that a lot. I'm a futurist. I study the future and so forth. What does that look like?
Yeah, so basically, many organizations use it, like the McKinsey Corporation or the RAND Corporation, for example. The U.S. Military War College uses it. And it's a way to prepare for unknowns, for black swans, so to speak. And it's a way to prepare yourself, just like COVID-19, for example, came about. What was the preparation for that, and how did we handle it and manage it? And how did we learn from it to prepare for another such outbreak? I would say, unfortunately, we weren't very well prepared for COVID, while governments always thought about massive outbreaks like the bird flu and things of that nature. I think COVID was much more fast hitting and caught a lot of people by surprise. And again, I would say maybe some people weren't surprised. Maybe people were
Right.
testing it out on everybody to see what it would do. But that's pretty much what it is. It's an opportunity to try to look ahead 10, 20, 30 years, even 50 years, depending on how far you want to go out, and try to plan a sustainable future for you, your family, your society, your neighborhood, your people, your nation, to make sure that there's a sustainable future for you in it. Because for a lot of people, they're wondering, like the Ukrainians, for example, you know, did they plan for this? What was their planning mechanism? You know what I mean? There was no strategy for this. Those types of things. And then you want to try to figure out, my God, is my future mean I'm going to be wiped out?
Right.
Now, there'll be no more Ukraine. 45 million people are about to become Russian overnight. And the whole world sits by and lets it happen like nothing's going on. And then the crazy madman, jeopardizes our food supply line and bombs the port where all the grains are grown. And yet we sit idly by and let that happen. I mean, that's kind of outrageous, and that's when futurists need to plan a different type of strategy, and they should have planned for something like that 10, 20 years ago, whereby in which our supply line, especially our food supply line, would not be threatened like it is now, and we're seeing such high inflation rates, which is threatening the poor and the marginalized even more, which will increase the poverty of many people and push people into poverty, and probably people will suffer and die, and maybe whole societies may vanish. We don't know, but That's what futurism is all about. It's trying to decipher the unknowns, give us a playbook of how to manage it when you see it happening, and to put policies and procedures and actions in place that prevent the worst.
Now, I guess you kind of answered it, but in terms of the black population in particular, why is this particular area of research, in your opinion, so important? You kind of gave us an idea already, but when you talk about black folk in particular, is there anything that stands out for you in terms of how this discipline becomes so important, or why this discipline should be something that we should be looking at as a people?
I think one of the reasons why it's so important is because we haven't participated in any great numbers to make any real substantive differences in our future. And our pathway seems to be kind of laggardly moving in a very negative direction, especially with COVID 19 and almost zero population growth. You know, the growth of Black people in America has not expanded exponentially the way people always thought. You know, the big fear of the browning of America didn't happen from Black Americans, it happened from immigrants. You know, Black Americans are still roughly the same number we were, 20 years ago or so, right? 13% of the population, whatever the number is.
Mhm.
Why is it important? It's important because in this instance of high energy consumption, high energy rates, the increased amount of people's incomes being devoted to income, travel, gas, food, pushes people further and further into poverty. And so it's important for our public elected officials to understand the discipline a little bit better. I've conducted some training with with BLACA, the Black Leadership Commit. What is it called? The National Forum of Black Public Administrators, as well as Blacks in Government. I provided some training for them to try to give them a taste of what is happening. How people are using a playbook that we don't even know they're using, and how then do we secure our future such that it is sustainable, progressive, positive, vibrant, something that our children can strive for. I think, for example, the eminent numbers of Black men being killed by the police over the last 10 years, for example, being illustrated by the advance of the iPhone, this little tiny technological device, which can cause global disruption, which it did in the Arab Spring.
Right.
They basically, video broadcasted atrocities that were happening. So while these atrocities may have been happening to Black people in the past, now we have a mechanism whereby which we can see it in real lifetime. Now the question becomes, what kind of impact does it have on our children, on our future, and how do we move them in a way that's sustainable, that they even want to participate in the future? So when you couple, instantaneous, negative, deaths of Black people, and then you couple that with the negative population growth rate of COVID-19, when you couple that with, high gas rates, high food prices, high inflation, right? I think inflation was 9.1%, but the banks are giving you 0.92%. That means you're already losing, roughly 8.2% out the gate.
Right.
So, and then the banks try to, convince you, oh, put your money in our savings account. We're going to make it grow. We're going to give you 0.92%. What the hell is that?
Right.
But that's the type of brainwashing that we need to educate our young people about, and we need to prepare them. I'm going to be speaking at a back to school bag giveaway or something like that. And in the area that I'm going to be speaking, it's one of the nation's top agricultural food science universities in America. And yet, very few of the Black children from this location think about going into food science for a career.
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's the type of, mismatch we have going on with our youth. We do not have a Marshall Plan, which is what I used to speak about with the NAACP when I was doing some work with Blacks in Government. I was basically saying to some of the board members, why don't we have a Marshall Plan? Why don't the educators and maybe the Black churches in America, for example, instead of following our children for a donation every Sunday, why don't we follow our children and make sure that they become engineers and scientists and mathematicians and rocket science for the next 18 years, right? And that's the type of Marshall Plan that many other countries have, especially the Chinese had it.
Yes.
The Japanese had it with the Ginkgo schools and high testing and high repetition. And now at the end of all of that, controversy, they're leading the world in advancement. And while our children are floundering around, trying to be the lost children of Rockdale, for example, and something
Right.
like that, I don't know if you know that, but you can look that up. It's called The Lost Children of Rockdale. But our children are being sitting idle while their parents are working so far away from their home that 3 to 4 hours every night. There's nothing for them to do other than get in the mischief, right?
Hmm.
So so I think that's where our black elected officials really missed the boat. I mean, they come out and they say things like, "Oh, we're going to do X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z," but there's no plan. It's just a thought planted in your brainstem, but there's no plan on how to get there. I mean, we've got black elected officials who don't even know how to create jobs. They don't even know how to bring industry to the places where they've been elected. All they're doing is rubber stamping documents. And in my county, I've got businesses hopping over my county, going to the next county and opening up and creating 3, 4, 5,000 jobs, where my county is just sitting there wondering, how did that county get all those jobs? That's because they have a plan and have a business relationship. Unfortunately, that's what happens, though, when you've been marginalized so long. You don't have the business relationships that, other groups have had for 400 years because you've been enslaved. And so by the time you've been free, the people that you're negotiating with and understanding and who your business relationships with or your ties with are still marginalized. At the end of the day, maybe we know someone that has $1 million, but we don't know anyone that has 400 million.
Got you.
So the business relationships we're having is only negotiating $1 million. Whereas the next county over has got 400 million. So they get the Amazon, they get the Microsoft, they get the next UPS, and what do we get? We get truck driving schools, we get bond stores, we get hair salons, we get, wash houses, we get liquor stores. We get liquor stores and gas stations in every corner. That's what we get.
Right.
So when you're looking for a high-paying white-collar job that's paying 6 figures, it's not happening in basically where we're living. We got to drive 4 to 5 hours to get that job. But anyway, these are the things that I talk about that I hope people are listening to, and that's why we did that event in New York City with the Afro Futures Group to try to combine some of that scientific side to the artistic side and try to marry them in a way that we can incorporate that in the vision that we're trying to implant in our youth and in our politicians.
Excellent. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with William Jones, and today we are joined by futurist Yul Anderson. So, what can we do, in your opinion, to begin to fix this problem in terms of the things that you've listed and described that we're missing? What do you see as a strategy, as a plan to begin to re-implement? I know you mentioned something in terms of the role that the church can play in terms of kind of steering young people in certain directions. But what other things do you believe are missing, things that are not being done?
So I think one of the most damaging things I'm noticing, and it just happens as you get older and you're making observation, right? You're looking at things. The way our society is built up, like some of our suburbs, for example, where there are no sidewalks, just no sidewalks. So there's nothing encouraging you to meet your common man or woman and group together because everyone's in a car. That in itself is a problem, and people should protest against that. People should demand connectivity. People should demand public access, public roads in the sense of advanced technology in the highways instead of just pouring concrete and tar, which raises the heat and the global ozone, right? You're just covering the earth with more rock and tar as opposed to putting in smart technology in the road so we can have driverless vehicles. We can have advanced, personal transport vehicles, for example. Those types of thinking aren't happening because we're still tied to a post-World War economic theory and economic model. One of the other things I think that's going to test the economic theory of inflation, runaway inflation by raising interest rates on mortgages and financing, is that there's so much money in out here. You've heard of the wealth gap between Black Americans and white Americans. Well, most wealthy white people don't care if it's 5%. They have to make their money work for them. It's only us that sits there going, "Oh Lord, I hope my money doesn't leave the bank," where white people are still buying homes.
Right.
They're still moving along. They don't care if it's a 10% increase in food. They've got the wealth that makes it happen. So some of my friends and one of my colleagues, Hazel Henderson, who just passed, and I think I sent you some information on her on ethical markets. She talked about the fact, number one, that there's not enough, that there is enough money in the world to solve all the problems we're trying to solve.
Right.
She was an advocate for green or blue technology, which is harvesting and growing food in salt water in the oceans. She was also advocate in changing the way we measure GDP, and of course, by high time, we should have changed it, right? And Black folks, we need to, read more books, for example, even if it's hard math and hard economic modeling and hard theory, we need to kind of figure it out. Always going for the easy, low-hanging fruit just to get by is not enough to sustain yourselves. And so what we find is we have this me, mentality such that I've got mine, you get yours. And so, if you've got one person who unfortunately does not have 10 mentors, I don't think one Black man has 10 Black men that they're mentoring, making sure that they're going to be successful in the future. Then therefore, unfortunately, they're not preparing the future very well, other than just for themselves or for their immediate family. And so we really have to be a little bit more daring and giving of ourselves and our talents, even to strangers. On my particular property, I have a not-for-profit, so I get phone calls of people looking to perform community hours as an alternative to going to prison. So I had a young lady here who I think she had 60 hours and she's a freshman in college. How was she going to perform the 60 hours? But she didn't know who the sheriff is in town, who is a Black person. She didn't know who the judge is in town, who's a Black person. She had no connectivity on how to even manipulate the system to make it better for herself. So while she's here, I made the contact for her. I made the connections. I forced her to go out and meet these people and make a change for herself. Now, sometimes they come back and they say, oh, my hours were lessened or my case got thrown out. But if you don't have a person to call on when you are being eaten by the system, let's use it that generically, then you're just going to get eaten. You know what I mean? And so I try to do the little bit I can do that's local on the ground. And then with the Afrofuturists and the African American Future Society, I try to broaden my reach nationally, internationally, globally, to try to get people to start thinking about our culture as Black Americans, meaning we need to own it and control the message and the marketing. That's number one. And then number two, what I try to do is link Black Americans with international organizations that are utilizing futures research methodologies so that they can bring that back within their own institutions or where they're also working to try to make that a better place. Just because you get a diversity, equity, and inclusion certification doesn't mean you're preparing for the future for yourself, right? What that means is, you're on the bandwagon, you're doing what's popular, and you're doing what's, most easily reachable. I have a diversity, equity, and inclusion certificate, and no one's offering me no $20 million. You know what I mean? It's just bullcrap. And then the bullcrap really is, if the institutions were fair and equitable, we would never need this type of certification in the first place.
Understood. So real quick, before moving to our next question, you mentioned your nonprofit. Can you give us the names of your organizations and how can folks reach you?
Well, so the name of my organization is called the African American Future Society. We are located in Conyers, Georgia. They can call me at 404-368-0135. You can also reach me at our website, www.taafs.com, the African American Future Society.com. Or you can Google me, Ewell, Y-U-L Anderson. You can find me that way. I do want to share that we are embarking on a major trip in December. For those of you that follow the United Nations, it is the International Decade of People of African Descent. And we as Black Americans need to make sure that we carve out a niche for ourselves within this forum. It's the first time it's ever been done. Because if we don't, other ethnic communities will do it for themselves and leave us outside looking in, wondering what happened.
Right.
And so we need to make sure we carve out a space for ourselves. So this is going to happen in December. I'll be posting it on my website so people can participate. But we need to be there. It's going to be December 3rd through the 5th, Geneva, Switzerland. If, depending on COVID or the monkey virus, we'll figure out whether we got to do it virtually or in person. I'm hoping we can do it in person because I really want to show, some strength in numbers. Even if 10 black people show up, that's a lot for white people to see all at once, so.
Right.
So, but on the real side of that, we need to be much more deliberate in our future. We can't just say, oh, Pookie and Ray Ray graduated from high school without getting hit by a bullet. Thank God. We need to have a better plan for our children as opposed to, oh, I'm surprised they're still alive and they're making it, and that is as a result of us only recently being afforded the opportunity to work based on the Civil Rights Act, based on affirmative action, roughly in 1935 again, so that if in 1935, basically any black person with 40 or 30 years of work history is relatively new, and that in that instance, those persons that have 30 and 40 years of history need to realize that, and they need to pass that on, but in greater numbers. And the biggest difficulty is because we're so afraid and fearful at work because, the white person can fire us at any moment because there are very few black businesses out here hiring people, that we need to have a Machiavellian theory on blackness at the workplace,
Right.
We don't have that, and we need to figure that out. And we need to figure out. I'm hoping. Unfortunately, COVID was probably one of the best things for black kids in school. And the reason why I meant that is because black people had to rely on themselves to make sure their kids were educated for those 2 years. That really put a lot of pressure on people. And I think the easy, low-hanging fruit is just sending them back into the institution that, quote-unquote, sends them to prison, if you believe in the prison school pipeline.
Right? Why would you
Right.
send them back, right?
Right.
Why would you send them back? It just doesn't make any sense. And that's the foolery that we keep, running into, right? That's the foolery that we keep running into is why would we keep sending our kids back to a system that we feel is undermining their success? Why would we do that? But yet we do it.
Wow, interesting. We are coming up against it, and we have these, as I always say, we have these great conversations, and we're always limited by time. Would you be willing to come back to further discuss your findings, your ideas, your theories as it relates to the future of black people?
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, we have to grow this, and we have to grow the mindset of what it means to do this type of work, right? Mm-hmm. And definitely for me, I need to train more people to follow me or break off and do it on their own, And the shame of people using the word future in the title of whatever they're doing and not knowing the methodology that goes along with it. I mean, that's the thing that hurts us. Oh, it's the future. And what is it? Oh, we drinking alcohol. I'm just launching a new vodka,
Right. I got you. So, yes, we're going to continue this conversation. So, ladies and gents, if you like what you're hearing, if you love what you're hearing, be sure to tune in next week, Tuesday, 10 a.m., right here on 1450 AM WOL, where information is power, 95.9 FM. And you can also join us online at WOLDCnews.com. So this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones, where we're taking black folks into the future. And as I mentioned, we talk about Afrofuturism. Just remember, it's not just about Wakanda. It's about the future of black folk and really questioning and examining and asking ourselves where we're going to be in the future. I'd like to thank Yoel Anderson, who we're going to have back next week. I'd also like to thank Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's episode.